Do you have a series that you really love, but for the life of you, you don't know why? Something that, even if it's really good, you couldn't even begin to explain what it is that makes it good? I think a lot of people have at least one show like that, and for me, that has always been the Monogatari series. Back when I first watched Monogatari all the way back in 2011, I had the distinct impression that I was watching something different. I didn't understand what it was about the show that made it feel like that, it just did. Everything about it, from the story to the characters, felt unlike anything I'd ever seen before, and if you'd asked me to explain why I liked it, I honestly couldn't have told you. And the funny thing is, that wasn't always the case. Initially, I had no interest in watching Monogatari. To me, it just seemed like some weird, artsy show that was just being weird for the sake of being weird. It was the sort of show that was completely off my radar, and I'd have written it off entirely were it not for a friend of mine who convinced me to finally give it a shot. When I asked him what it was about, though, he told me something that I've never forgotten. He basically described the series as this story about a teenager named Araragi saving girls from ghosts and monsters, and after watching the series, yeah, I'd call that a fair summary. It was a little basic, but it got the job done. That said, even though I agreed with what he'd said, there was still something about it that bothered me. Like that there was something fundamentally missing from that description. Something important. I couldn't figure out what though, so at the time I just shrugged it off and kept watching. After that, at some point Monogatari had become one of my favorite franchises in all of anime. I loved the world, the characters, the story, all of it. Although something I never did was actually sit down and rewatch the series from the very beginning until recently. And when I did that, I saw something that really surprised me.
私を助けてくださるって聞いたのですけれど。
助ける？そりゃ無理だ。君が勝手に一人で助かるだけだよ、お嬢ちゃん。
Right there. The reason why my friend's description of the show had bugged me at first had been staring me in the face all along, literally spelled out in the very first episode. It was something so obvious that I was baffled I'd never seen it before. Seriously, how did I not remember this? Was I just a dumb middle school kid who didn't understand the show? Was it buried under all the mounds of dialogue, or was I just distracted? Whatever the reason, somehow, someway, I had completely missed this line over the years. Now that I finally saw it with a fresh perspective though, I finally understood why my friend's summary of the story always stuck out to me. It was wrong. Monogatari was never a story about someone rescuing people, it was a story about people rescuing themselves. It was funny to think I'd missed something so obvious, but then as I kept watching, this whole idea of characters helping themselves kept nagging at me. It was the sort of thing that once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. Overnight, it felt like something had finally clicked and I understood Monogatari in a way I never really did before. As I was watching, it became clear that, rather than this idea just being something people said a few times, this was in fact the driving theme behind the whole series. No matter the arc or who it involved, the story always seemed to boil down to a need for the featured characters of the arc to be willing to help themselves in some way. When you break it down, each arc in Monogatari actually follows a pretty simple formula. Araragi finds some girl who is either cursed or bothered by some kind of apparition. He takes it upon himself to try and help this person. He consults Oshino on how to do that, and then he follows his advice to make it happen, thereby helping each girl in the process. For the first season, there isn't an arc that shies away from this formula, but while it sounds like this could make things repetitive, it's in the details that Monogatari starts to become very interesting. Because while each arc follows the same general plot structure, the implications and ideas behind all of them vary wildly. With this all in mind, let's look at the Hitagi Crab arc and see what we can find out. As the very first arc of Monogatari, it starts things off on a relatively simple note. We see Araragi catch Senjugahara after she's fallen and realizes she weighs almost nothing. Then, after inquiring a bit, he finds out that Senjugahara was cursed by a crab spirit, and Araragi, being the white knight that he is, decides to take her to Oshino. With Oshino's help, they prepare a ritual that will let them deal with the crab spirit, and despite a few complications, everything ultimately pans out. Senjugahara gets her weight back, and Araragi makes a new friend. On its face, it sounds nice and simple, but like many things in Monogatari, it's far from it. The ritual Oshino prepares isn't some sort of exorcism or even a way to fight the apparition. All it does is bring the spirit into the same room with Senjugahara so she could, as you might have guessed, save herself. Granted, it's absolutely something that never would have happened without Araragi or Oshino's help, but at the same time, it never would have worked if not for Senjugahara's willingness either. Getting help and trying to help yourself aren't mutually exclusive here, and that's something the series establishes as early as this first arc. Sure, Senjugahara ultimately makes the plea to the crab spirit to get her weight back, but at the same time, none of it would have been possible without Araragi and Oshino's help. In fact, this is something the show does a lot. Most problems the characters face usually boil down to a need for someone to either ask for help or be willing to face a problem themselves, and oftentimes we see in the story that Aragi's role in an arc isn't so much to save someone as it is to be that helping hand these people might need for their final push. And the funny thing is, he doesn't even seem to realize it. Aragi as a character is profoundly motivated by helping people. Whenever he sees someone in trouble, he can't help but rush into it and try to save the day, even if that ultimately backfires on him. What it allows him to do, though, is force himself into problems some of these characters might not otherwise face, so whether he realizes or not, he usually helps these people realize they need to change in the first place. Or at the very least, he's there to help, which, incidentally, is the focus on the subsequent 2 arcs. The Mayoi Slug arc introduces us to Hachikuji Mayoi, a young ghost who is lost and trying to find her way back to her mother's house. Only problem is, anytime someone tries to help her, they end up lost as well. Unlike Senjugahara's situation though, Hachikuji isn't someone who's cursed by an apparition, she is the apparition and can't help but curse people who try to help her. Spirit or not though, Aragi sees someone in trouble and he doesn't rest until Hachikuji gets to where she wants to be. Then you have the Suruga Monkey arc in Kanbaru who, after discovering Senjugahara and Aragi are in a relationship, falls into a jealous despair and foolishly makes a wish on a monkey's paw, the result of which has her possessed and trying to kill Aragi in the middle of the night. Unlike with Hachikuji though, nothing Aragi does seems to help Kanbaru. At her core, all her problems involve Senjugahara, so despite all his efforts, Aragi ultimately can't change the situation like he could with Hachikuji. Even though Kanbaru herself wants to be rid of the devil possessing her, she just can't work out her subconscious jealousy unless Senjugahara herself is the one who helps her, which is exactly what happens. What both these arcs show us are characters who are already trying to help themselves in their own ways, but needing just that little bit of extra help. Hachikuji's been actively wandering for years and Kanbaru offers to have her arm cut off as soon as she learns about the situation, but we only actually see these people saved when they get help from the right person. So right off the bat we have 3 different variations on people trying to help themselves but needing the right person or circumstances to do so. While they all feature different characters and stories, Senjugahara, Hachikuji, and Kanbaru are all ultimately people who face a supernatural problem and set out to actively fix it. It's through their own personal effort mixed with the effort of people like Aragi that they ultimately succeed and grow as people. Which begs the question, what happens when a character doesn't actually try to help themselves? What happens when, instead of someone seeing a problem and wanting to fix it, they don't try at all, or they don't even see a problem? Well, that's where the next 2 arcs come in. Out of all the other arcs in Bakemonogatari, the Nadeko Snake arc was always one that I felt was the most basic. Really, when you boil it down, the whole thing basically amounts to little more than that outline I gave earlier. Aragi finds Sengoku Nadeko, a young girl who's being constricted by snake spirits, and basically performs an exorcism to get rid of the snakes. There's a few bumps along the way, but by the end, Sengoku is freed, Aragi has a new girl for his harem, and life goes on. It might sound like I sped through that, but really that's all there is to the entire arc. Sengoku herself doesn't actually grow or change in any meaningful way. She started off as a cute little girl and ended as that same cute little girl. Nobody else changes or learns anything, the whole thing just sort of happens. It's entertaining enough, sure, but it's hard not to feel like there's something seriously missing here. And that's the point. The arc itself is about saving Sengoku rather than having her face any sort of meaningful change or growth, which, in the long run, only guarantees that history will wind up repeating itself. In typical Aragi fashion, he rushes into the situation without thinking and does whatever he can to help, not realizing that maybe there's a deeper issue that will cause problems if it's not addressed. Lastly, we have the Tsubasa Cat arc, which is where this whole idea of people getting saved versus saving themselves starts to get really interesting. We have one of Aragi's closest friends, Hanakoa, possessed by the Sawari Neko, a cat spirit that exists only to ease the pent-up stress of her mistress, which usually results in people getting hurt or killed as it goes on a rampage. Unlike with everyone else though, Hanakoa doesn't seem to have any idea anything's wrong. In fact, her denial about it is so strong that she doesn't even stop to consider it. As far as she knows, nothing is amiss. It's demonstrably shown that her life is a complete broken mess, but she's so fundamentally broken as a person that she never faces any of it. Instead, she leaves it all to Sawari Neko, which in the end means she never actually faces anything during the arc. There's never any ritual to exorcise the apparition or some conversation that has her realize she needs a change. It's just another case of Aragi rushing to the rescue without addressing the deeper problems of it all. So with all that in mind, I actually want to take a moment to stop and point something out. In these stories, it's pretty easy to think that these apparitions haunting these people are the bad guys, right? I mean, almost every bad thing can be traced back to them, but it's important to remember that this isn't really the case. These apparitions aren't monsters trying to haunt little girls just because they can. They're specific spirits with a specific purpose, and the series mentions this multiple times. In fact, rather than blaming the monster, the series seems to go on to suggest that the fault lies with the people who are possessed in the first place. Remember, these aren't just random people who happen to get cursed one day. They're all people whose specific situations led to them calling the curse to them. Shinjigahara made a deal with the crab. Kambaru made a wish on the monkey's paw. Nadeko angered the snake spirits. These aren't just helpless children who got attacked by monsters. They're fundamentally broken people who did something stupid to call an apparition to them. Of course, in cases like Shinjigahara and Kambaru, they realized their mistake and ultimately made a decision to learn and grow from it, but what about everyone else? The Sawari Neko may be gone for now, but Hanako's life is still in shambles, so it's only a matter of time before she gets stressed enough that the cat spirit rises again. Sengoku might not be getting choked by snakes anymore, but the fact that she never addressed her deep mental issues plants the seeds for something much, much worse later on. Through and beyond Bakemonogatari, we see this fundamental need for people to be willing to help themselves in dozens of different ways, not to mention the bad things that can happen when people refuse to do so. Through the course of the series, we see characters who are willing to improve themselves change for the better, in some cases even moving on to help others, much like how Aoragi helped them. Meanwhile, characters who never learn their lesson only face or cause more hardships for those around them until they finally learn to accept their faults and learn from them. Learning to be a bit more selfish, learning to be happy, learning to love yourself. Even something as simple as learning that sometimes you gotta let someone else help you. No two lessons are alike, but they always boil down to the same fundamental idea that these characters can only grow and develop if they are willing to help themselves as well as those around them. It isn't what drives the story, it is the story. And I can safely say all this because this very idea is what drives the plot of the rest of the series. I could go on with more examples, but I think you get the point by now. Question is, what does it matter? Almost every piece of entertainment out there features a series of themes or motifs. Heck, I could name about a dozen from Monogatari alone. Depression, growing up, coping with loss, knowing your role, friendship, I could go on. So what makes this whole theme of being willing to change yourself for the better worth discussing? Well, admittedly I just wanted an excuse to talk about Monogatari and something I found pretty neat about it, but there is some merit in taking a more thoughtful approach to stuff like anime too. I've been a part of many conversations about Monogatari, but usually they always boil down to trying to decipher the convoluted plot and arguing about who is best girl. Which, don't get me wrong, I love a good fan discussion as much as the next guy. Kaiki is best girl and I could happily debate that for hours, but there's something to be said for looking for deeper meanings in shows too. There's something really refreshing about taking a deep, intrinsic look at something you love and seeing what comes up. Although, if I had to pin it down to a single reason for why I wanted to talk about this, I'd have to point back to when I first watched Bakemonogatari all those years ago. Like I said, when I first started the series, I was just some dumb kid, a teenager in school, and frankly, being a teenager sucks. Everything sucks, everyone's a jerk, nobody understands you, and half the time you have no idea what you're doing. It's a rough part of life for sure, but it's something you do ultimately get through with the help of your friends and family. I bring this up because when I look back to Bakemonogatari, I remember being entranced by a show I didn't really understand. But, on some level, I think those underlying themes spoke to me. In most stories, whenever there's a problem, there's always someone else who comes to fix it. Problems are always solved by someone coming to save the day. Heroes always beat the bad guys for you. Someone notices their friend's problems and sweeps them off their feet. Problems just go away if you wait long enough for someone to go take care of it. It's one of the most prevalent ideas in storytelling, and don't get me wrong, it's by no means a bad thing. Using stories to escape reality in ways like that is basically why fiction exists. But it's because it's such an expansive theme that most people at some point in their lives make the same exact mistake characters like Hanakawa make. Rather than facing their problems or trying to better themselves, they just sit by, let the bad things happen, and pray someone will come and make it all better. So for me, in one of the most difficult periods of my life, watching a show that flat out said that sitting by and waiting to be rescued is a bad thing, well, it really resonated with me. Even if I didn't fully understand it, or hell, even if I didn't understand it at all. Don't get me wrong, it's not like this show changed my life or anything. Far from it. But even so, I think it's a good message to send to people, and it's a good message to highlight. I could keep going on, but I think I've made my point by now. If it's not obvious by now, I really fucking love the Monogatari series, and would happily recommend it to anyone. It's a really smart, well-written series that deserves all the praise it gets. And I'd love to hear what people think about the series too. If at all possible, I'd love to have a good discussion on the ideas and themes of the show, if people are interested. Most of all though, I wanted to sincerely thank you for watching. I had a good time making this, and I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble on. Take care out there.